6:47 p.m. and I'm calling our business meeting to order. Before I read our agenda, I'm going to read our land acknowledgement. We are gathered on the land of the Dakota and Ojibwe peoples. I ask you to join me in acknowledging the Dakota and Ojibwe community, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. St. Louis Park Public Schools also acknowledges that it was founded upon exclusions and erasures of many indigenous peoples, including those on whose land this school district is located. This acknowledgement demonstrates a commitment to dismantling the ongoing legacies of colonial power and the district's desire to support the ongoing work of local indigenous communities to thrive in our schools. On our agenda, we have open forum, certificates of election for the 2023 school board general election, superintendent's report, discussion items including 2024-25 and 2025-26 calendar, year-end audit preview for FY23, superintendent search, 2 items, review MSBA executive search services proposal and review draft communication plan. We have our consent agenda, and on our action agenda, superintendent search MSBA executive search services proposal, labor agreement SEIU local 284 school nutrition, followed by communications and transmittals and adjournment. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as presented? Moved by Ken. Is there a second? Second by Virginia. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. First up, we have open forum. I've got 4 folks signed up for open forum here. I'm just going to take them in the order that we received them. So first we have Stephen. And while you're coming up, Stephen, I'm going to just read our description here. In the interest of open communications, the St. Louis Park School District wishes to provide an opportunity for the public to address the board. Anyone indicating a desire to speak during open forum will be acknowledged by the chair and allotted 3 minutes to present the topic. Colin has the timing thing, so he'll show you when your time is up. During open forum, the board and administration will listen to comments. Please be aware that disrespectful comments or comments of a personal nature directed at an individual, either by name or inference, will not be allowed. Okay, so Stephen Anderson, you can come up and sit right at the chair. That would be great. Thank you.
All right. I have visual aids. Okay. So, good evening. I'm Stephen Anderson, and I live in St. Louis Park. And I want to speak to some of the concerns that were brought up at the October open forum. But before I do, I want to tell you about my experience attending junior high and high school in Sheboygan, Wisconsin during the 1970s. Some of my peers picked up that I was different before I even knew that I was. I became a target. And you know the names: fag, faggot, femme, queer, fairy, etc. It wasn't everybody, but it happened enough that it hurt deeply. Luckily, I had some supportive friends. I came out to them at age 16. My first full-time elementary teaching position was in a south suburban school in the metro area. The principal was homophobic. It wasn't safe for me to be out at school as a probationary teacher can be dismissed without reason. A few years later, I transferred to a different school, and there I could be my whole self with the support of the principal. I just lost my place. Several parents had requested that their children be assigned to my classroom because they suspected that their kids might be gay. They wanted a positive role model for them, and I know this because one of the parents said so as much at our first conference. I ran into another student, now an adult, a couple of years ago at Target, and I realized why his mom wanted him in my classroom. One of the concerns brought up at the October school board meeting was about a children's book, Our Subway Baby. It was a read aloud in a third grade classroom. The parents said that it was not appropriate for third grade. I disagree. I taught third grade and fourth grade. This book is not about sexuality. It's about a family and the love that they share. Each of these books has a place in our schools. My concern about providing an opt-out is, where would the students go? To the office? They have to be supervised. What about the parent who doesn't believe in climate change? Does her child opt out of that unit during science class? What about the child who shares going to the park with her moms during morning meeting? Will the teacher have to say, "I'm sorry, we can't talk about that here"? How might my school experience, I'm just about done.
Finish your thought, thank you.
How might my school experience have been different if these books were read aloud in elementary school in Sheboygan? I respectfully ask our school board members to consider very carefully what an opt-out would mean for our LGBTQ students, parents, and staff. Thank you.
All right, next up we have Jeff Thompson.
Is there a microphone or just talk loud?
This is it right here.
Okay, cool. All right, where's my timer? Practice this. Oh, okay, it's not digital. All right, good evening. Thank you, Chair Casey, Dr. McGuire, school board for making these public forums available each month. I think they're great. Hope you all had a nice Thanksgiving. My name is Jeff Thompson. Currently have 3 children in our school system here, and 3 things I'd like to just cover real briefly. First, I'm really here today at the urging of friends and neighbors who, we all moved into St. Louis Park about 20 years ago, approximately 20 years ago. The main reason we chose St. Louis Park to live is because it was a great school system, right? Small community setting, the schools were consistently ranked in the top 10 in the state. Lately, we've asked ourselves, what happened to St. Louis Park schools? The latest U.S. News and World Report ranking of high schools has St. Louis Park at number 73 in the state. I recently received the results of last year's MCAs. I specifically have information on last year's 7th grade class. The class is below the state average and only partially meeting both reading and math requirements. In fact, for math, which is the universal language, the middle school average score was 1/10 of a point away from being in the does not meet category. Now, I know administrators and school boards will point to COVID and the unfair nature of tests. That might all be true, but we still understand what the plan is. And it begs the question, are we listening truly to what teachers need, or are the board and administrators hearing what they want to hear due to their ideology? Is there a better way of measuring academic results within the school? If there is, people are open, we'd love to hear it. For example, maybe our kids who take the ACT or AP tests have amazing scores, amazing results. We just don't know based on lack of sharing. So where my neighbors and fellow citizens get sad and frustrated is seeing good families choose not to attend St. Louis Park. Because like it or not, families make decisions on where to send their kids to school based on these academic measurements. And we are surrounded by school districts that are ranked in the top 10 in the state. As citizens, we've done our part. We've passed every referendum. Our property taxes have increased, yet school performance goes down. The district seems to be fine with Park kids leaving the district as long as we can offset by open enrolling Minneapolis kids. And we ask for that to change. Second, one area I do want to express my appreciation for is critical thinking and the focus on it. I know critical thinking is one of our measurement areas for 23-24, and it's so important in today's world. However, I do find it a little paradoxical that when I started researching the candidates for school board this fall, I ran into 2 things. Candidates endorsed by political parties, and other candidates who promoted their work on flipping states from blue to red or red to blue. I honestly can't remember and don't care. But when I start to see people align with political parties, that is the antithesis of critical thinking. Political parties represent rigid thinking structures, rigid thinking structures, essentially echo chambers and herd mentality. I would like to see St. Louis Park School Board rise above political parties and partisan reasoning. As our first president, George Washington, warned, political parties may now and then answer popular ends, but they are likely in the course of time and things to become potent engines by which cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled people will be able to subvert the power of the people and to usurp for themselves. I think an impactful show of critical thinking by our leaders would be for school boards to refuse political endorsements. Didn't get to my third one, but thank you for the time. Hope you guys have all a happy and healthy and safe winter season. Appreciate it.
All right, next up we have Matt Kinney.
Thank you. I'm speaking tonight to express my opposition to allowing parents to opt their children out of lessons that address identity-based topics. My broad definition of identity-based topics includes, but is not limited to, LGBTQ, gender, racial, religious identities. I think that allowing opt-outs for any of these reasons sends a message that's harmful to students, teachers, and staff. Allowing parents to opt their children out of these lessons teaches our children that some identities are less worthy of discussion than others. This is a dangerous and harmful message that can lead to discrimination and bullying. All students deserve to learn about the full range of human experiences, including those of people who are different from themselves. Identity-based lessons help students to understand the world around them, to develop empathy for others, and to become more tolerant and accepting individuals. I feel the same way whether the motivation for opt-out requests is based in religion, politics, beliefs based on race, misinformation, or even simple misunderstanding. It doesn't matter. I trust our schools and our teachers to know what is appropriate and what isn't. We don't need to burden them with additional administrative tasks tracking what would surely become a long list of opt-out requests. Thank you for your time. Do you want a hard copy?
I'm sure you can give it to Heather. Thank you. Next up we have Cliff.
Hello, my name is Cliff Cashton. I'm a resident of St. Louis Park, and I'm also here tonight to address the issue of curriculum opt-outs, especially in regards to specific segments of our community. All of my children matriculated through the St. Louis Park school system, and I strongly believe that one of the purposes of our schools is to build community. Community in St. Louis Park and community beyond the borders of St. Louis Park. And one of the ways in which this happens is through the exposure of students to a diversity of people, backgrounds, as well as exposure to ideas and information that may be unfamiliar and even uncomfortable. And I think that allowing parents to opt their students out of specific curriculum matters is an impediment to the building of community. I therefore urge the board to oppose such opt-outs. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, next on our agenda, we have the, yes.
If someone will follow up.
I know this is what I have.
Oh, you let
Yep.
Okay, saying it, when you ask if people want to follow up, you ask.
Oh, if people want to follow up, yes. Thank you. Those of you who spoke, does anyone want to follow up connection with the superintendent and myself? Okay, we got contact.
Jeff does.
Okay,
He just raised his hand.
okay,
Jeff does.
got it.
Thank you.
Got your email address right here. Thanks, Jeff. Okay, certificates of election for the 2023 school board general election. We have the resolution authorizing issuance of certificates. I'm actually just going to read the resolution instead of the description here. Be it resolved by the school board of Independent School District number 283 as follows. It is hereby found, determined, and declared as follows. Number one, the board has canvassed the general election for school board members held on November 7th, 2023. Number two, the board chair and clerk are hereby authorized to execute certificates of election on behalf of the board of the district to the following candidates: Celia Anderson, C. Colin Cox, Virginia Mancini, Taylor Williams. who have, based on the results of the canvass, received a sufficiently large number of votes to be elected to fill vacancies on the board caused by expiration of terms on the first Monday in January, next following the election. The certificates of election shall be in substantially the forms attached there as presented. After the time for contesting the election has passed and each candidate has filed all campaign financial reports required by Minnesota Statutes Chapter 211A, the clerk of the school board is hereby directed to deliver a certificate to each person entitled thereto personally or by certified mail. The clerk is hereby directed to enclose with the certificates of election a form of acceptance of office and form of oath of office in substantially the forms attached. Is there a motion to approve the resolution as presented? Moved by Abdi Hakim. Is there a second? I'll second. Second by Sarah. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that carries. Thank you. Okay. Now we have our superintendent's report.
Hi, thank you, Chair Casey. I begin each of my reports by sharing the mission. It grounds our work, and it's the reason we gather. St. Louis Park Schools sees, inspires, and empowers each learner to live their brilliance in an environment that centers student voice and experience to create racially equitable learning that energizes and enhances the spirit of our community. Tonight is all about student activities. I'd like to share some information about the middle school and then some other activities that are taking place this month. The middle school fall athletic season had over 250 athletes in grades 6 through 8 competing at the middle school in the fall: football, volleyball, boys and girls soccer, girls tennis, and girls speed swimming, and over 50 7th and 8th graders competing at the high school level. Currently, the middle school girls basketball is in full swing, and we have 2 teams competing against area middle schools until winter break. We also have many middle school athletes competing in multiple high school winter sports, and boys basketball starts in January and registration will open this week. So December, as you might recall, is an action-packed student activity month. So in addition to getting snow, which is my favorite part of December, we also are jam-packed with student activities. And that's true at the high school and the middle school level. There are so many musical performances scheduled in addition to athletic events, and community members can find specific information about dates that they might want to add to their family calendars this month at the district website, www.gopark.org. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Next up, we have our first discussion item, which is the 2024-25 and 2025-26 calendar. I think we have Director Cryer here.
Madam Chair, members of the board, superintendent, it's calendar time again. So we do this every year. We bring you and remind you of a couple things, and for people in the audience, we create this calendar each year, and we believe it to be, an instructional tool. So we have some principles that we use when we're putting our calendar together. We try to have as few broken weeks of instruction as possible. We try to have our semesters roughly balanced. We try to maintain our student contact time, of days and total teacher contract work days, making sure that we're doing what we can to minimize transportation costs and not having unnecessary routes and things of that nature. We typically start after Labor Day unless there's construction and we can get a waiver by the state. We begin as early as possible. We end as early as possible. Winter break is roughly 2 weeks, but that always changes because of where the holidays fall and where the breaks are laying out. So that's part of the puzzle every year. Spring break has historically been 1 week, sometime right after the third quarter. We avoid major religious holidays for events whenever possible. In 23-24, we included non-instructional days for Yom Kippur and Eid HaFitr. Graduation, we try not to have that on a Monday or a Friday due to setup and teardowns. And we approve next year's calendar
And then the year after that is a draft, so that people have some planning and thinking about what we're going to do. And then we usually bring that calendar, that second year calendar back the following fall to say, yep, this is what we still want, or we got more input from staff, parents, community, and we're going to make some adjustments to the thing that we drafted 2 years earlier. So in doing that, and I know this is small up here, and I think, and it's a little crazy color coordinated. For those who haven't seen this before, the blue days typically have something to do with professional development. The light blue days have something to do with digital learning days, where we then have Family Connect conferences or Family Connect time in student-led conferences. The green days have something to do with holidays or break periods. Yellow days are the end of quarters, and the brownish tan days are like grading and reporting conference days. So when we put that all together, we get our calendar, and that's this year's calendar. For 24-25, we're trying to roll this over as closely as possible, and then it's never perfect, and we'll give you some feedback, even in what we've been able to do. What we have in this draft is this was the draft we looked at a year ago and said we think this will be our 24-25 calendar. We're going to bring a few modified changes back to here, and this will be our recommended calendar. To avoid Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur conflicts, we're moving one of those light blue instructional or digital learning days with the Family Connect conferences on October 10th. Yom Kippur starts at sundown on the 11th, so it doesn't happen to fall on an instructional day this year. Just like Eid happens to be the April 30th, and then April 31st, the following day after sundown, would be the first day of spring break. So that's also not an instructional conflict this year as well. With a couple changes like that we have, students would, oops, I see just a color coding issue, but students would be done on June 5th, and the teachers would have their last work day on the 6th of June in this recommended calendar. And you can see that the semesters are roughly balanced at 86 and 85 days per semester. Any questions on the recommended holidays, yeah? Or recommended calendar?
Go ahead.
Yeah. How come you're putting the observance for Yom Kippur on Thursday instead of Friday?
No, if I could look at it, the Yom Kippur starts at sundown on the 11th, which is a Friday.
Right.
Which then puts, it's just noted, just so we didn't lose it, it falls on a Saturday. So the day that we would normally celebrate it is a Saturday, which is the non-instructional day. The light blue day on the 10th is a digital learning day for students, and then they would be doing student-led conferences at the middle school or Family Connect time at the high school.
I thought it had something to do with Yom Kippur. So.
No.
Okay.
Well, we originally, I think, had the 10th up on the 3rd or the 4th, which is right in the middle of Rosh Hashanah. So we moved the Connect Day later to avoid that conflict.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So I think we always run into this issue on spring breaks and winter breaks and things like that. It looks like our winter break comes back for Thursday and Friday.
Yeah.
Is there a way we can avoid that?
Well, there is. There's a way, and this is one of the feedback I wanted to say is like in bringing a calendar, there's always problems with calendars, and so we certainly don't like to bring students back for one day, right? And yet, if we extend winter break And we had a number of people say we'd like to extend winter break because of flights, and if I fly back on New Year's Day, that creates a more expensive flight. There's less time with families and things like that. If we extend the break to the 3rd, and we can, then that pushes the end of the year out. And it actually, if we just keep the number of instructional days, then students would go have one day on the 9th. And that's not productive either, to have, just that one day hanging over on a Monday. So that would be, a different trade-off.
We have 2-day weeks on Thanksgiving, 2 days weeks on MEA. I mean, it's not unheard of.
It's not unheard of.
2-day weeks.
We wouldn't do a one-day comeback on a Friday, but we have done 2 days, yes.
Do you have a sense of what other districts are doing about that next year or anything?
I personally don't. I know that, there are some school districts that always have 2-day, 2-week winter breaks, and there's some school districts that never have, full 2-week breaks.
I think we've gone, I think it's like my 6th year or whatever, sometimes 6th time doing this. Like, we've done both, and it just kind of depends on how the calendar falls, and then it always is the conversation of, like, what happens at the end of the school year, and how does this affect it? So it's always that little bit of a balance, and I totally agree. I mean, going back, like, for one day on Monday, I think when we really asked folks, like, would you rather have full 2 weeks on winter break or go until like the 9th of June? They would be not going till the 9th of June.
The teacher union year after year has said it depends when you ask. If you ask students, or if you ask people in the fall, they want a longer winter break, and if you ask them in May, why didn't we get out earlier? And so it always depends when you ask.
And the reason that I ask too is also just because if there's like not that we have to bend to whatever, but if there's a general community, like if most of the metro is having those 2 days off or something like that, then we stand out and we're visible, and then I think we should just get ahead of that, right? That should be clear to people. If that's the choice we're making, then people should understand why we're doing this or something.
And, Superintendent, I would recommend that if that's the interest of the board, we could look at our neighbors before we bring this back on the 12th.
But not all of our neighbors celebrate or at least recognize the religious holidays that we do.
Right, I know. So I mean, there's all sorts of, right. And I think that just for our advice, just to sort of make sure that we're, generally aware of what's going on in the community, I just think it would be worthwhile. I'm not saying that we have to back to it. I'm just saying that just having some awareness of that, I think, would be helpful for us. So.
In my opinion, we have to be leaders for our neighbors.
Leaders, I like that. We'll be leaders for it.
I was asking about the 2-week break. Can I ask another question, though?
Yeah, and then Virginia's next.
Oh, okay. But you have that point on, it moves digital learning days to 3 for high school and 4 for middle school.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm not tracking.
Oh, in this year's calendar, we had 4 digital learning days at the high school and 4 digital learning days at the middle school, which at the high school, they also had another digital learning day for ACT testing. So we felt that was too many digital learning days, so we reduced one of the Family Connect days, and they're going to have an evening Family Connect instead of the digital learning day with the daytime Family Connect. So one less digital learning day at the high school. The middle school retains theirs, and ultimately there will be another. When we get to the at-a-glance calendar or the city calendar, we will have known when we can schedule ACT testing, and then there will be another light blue day somewhere in the spring for ACT testing.
Well, my questions were about the Family Connect days. So the first question I have is I'm looking for parent-teacher conferences in the fall. So I'm assuming that's the 17th and the 18th. What is, I don't know where.
So
where are the family?
This calendar does not lay out the evening conferences but it does take into account that there will be 2 evening conferences in the fall, 2 evening conferences in the spring, and so when teachers work 2 evening conference nights, then they get an alternative day off. We peg those days at August 27th, which is the day before Thanksgiving, and then it's the last Friday of spring break.
Maybe November, but that's okay.
I did, yeah, exactly,
I
thank you.
celebrate
What did I say?
Thanksgiving in August too. It's like-
Did I say August?
Yeah.
Wow, that's odd, yeah.
So
Yeah.
here's my other question. Could you tell me, and I probably know the answer to this, but I don't remember it. When we went from, so there's a difference between parent-teacher conferences and Family Connect days, or are we now calling parent-teacher conferences a type of Family Connect day? What is the?
Superintendent, I'm out of my lane.
Here's what I would say from my learning, where our use of these days is evolving. So the number of days they had this year evidently is new. And I've asked the secondary principals to evaluate what they're doing with those days so that as we think forward to the future, they'll be able to have some assessment of the value of those days. But they're.
Are you talking about the value of a Family Connect day, like the way that the high school just had, or are you talking about parent-teacher conferences in the
digital, how we're using those digital learning days,
Okay.
which are, some of them are currently being used for things like Family Connect.
I can add one little bit of knowledge that I have on that. So one of them is, in the previous years of work, we, had strategic objectives of increasing family engagement. So this was one of the ways that the middle school and high school looked at increasing family engagement was to have these Family Connect conferences. They still have regular conferences.
And it's the same amount of time.
And the same amount of time, but what they're doing is they're trying to avoid having traditional conferences on the same night, because then that uses up our translator services and all of that. So one will do a Family Connect day where they sharing information about the students, and then the other one, the middle school's having Family Connect, high school's having traditional conferences.
I'm just gonna say that perhaps there needs to be some clearer communication to families about what the intent of these are and why we're doing it. I think there was some confusion. And there was people just didn't know it. At the high school, I had high school families reaching out to me asking what it was, and I didn't know, and I realized that I should have just contacted you. Instead, I just directed them to Lanisha, because I didn't know, but I felt embarrassed that I don't know the answer to that. So it's still kind of fuzzy in my brain. So it would be great, especially if we're going to continue with a Family Connect model, and if it's connected to making sure that all of our families have the services that they need. That might need to be clearer, more clearly communicated.
Yeah.
Right, especially for families, I didn't know, I signed up for the parent-teacher conferences, so I didn't know if I was supposed to go to the Parent Connect, because I'm like, okay, I've gone to the, also, it was just I can't take off school, so I couldn't take off work in order to participate in it. I do know what the high school is doing for their Family Connect in the spring, and it sounds fantastic and phenomenal, and perhaps really great communication. I know I'm looking at you. Would help to the turnout, because it's a great opportunity for us to engage with our families. If they don't know about it, then they're, and I get it that it was in the 6425. Did I get the numbers right?
Yeah.
But it was still fuzzy about what it was. And what the feedback that I got was that we were only, as parents, we were only notified 2 weeks. It wasn't even 2 weeks. It was approximately 9 days before it happened, if we had to make. So that's what I'm just trying to clarify in my brain, what was going on. Also, is there, do you have a calendar committee?
Yes.
And does that include community members who would like to be on the calendar committee? Or is it just staff?
I'd say our calendar committee has not. We have taken the calendar to DPAC in previous years.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
To get,
And I know that calendars are super complicated because we have contractual things, but we also have state statute as far as hours that student contact time needs to be in place. I was just wondering where, if a community member approached me and said, what is this calendar committee and how do I get on it? I can say, have a response to that.
Join DPAC.
Yes. Yeah, thank you.
I know you probably told us this before, Director Cryer, but the numbers on the left for each month, you have a lot of like.
The numbers on the left.
Yeah, like on the far left.
This,
like,
and I'm gonna just stand up so if I can,
Yeah.
but and I know this won't broadcast on the streaming, but this is really an internal accounting tool. And over here are how many days of instruction are there in this month? So in the month of September, there are 20 days for, 1 through and there's 19 days for kindergarten. And you see there's 0 here of other things.
For second graders.
There are, here in the month of October, there are 20 instructional days. There's 1 teacher duty day that's accounted for with this PD day that's a non-instructional day. So we tally up all the days to then feed these numbers here of how many instructional days are here, how many teacher work days are here, and so we need this to be 185, we need this to be 171. And then that flows backwards.
Pardon me, and you're trying to balance out each quarter to be roughly,
Each semester,
roughly,
semester to be roughly 85.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, 86.
What is it, 185?
That's 185 teacher duty days
Oh, and then 171 contact times.
and 171 student contact days.
Got it. And does digital learning count as student contact?
Yes.
I'm picking up. Does that count as student contact?
Yes. According to our modest people and the business office.
Okay.
And the digital learning days can be asynchronous or synchronous.
And I know, I'm sorry, this just is on my brain too. So for e-learning days because of snow, like do we do e-learning days?
We do not.
Okay.
We do not have an e-learning plan in order to capitalize on e-learning days for snow days. You have to have developed a plan. It has to get run through teacher meet and confer. That's new in statute. And we have not, you used to have to submit the e-learning plan to MDE. I'm not sure you have to do that anymore, but you have to have a written plan.
Really?
We've looked at least one from a neighboring school district. I would propose it's on the long-term to-do list so that you can capitalize on e-learning opportunities. Now, it has to look different for elementary because we don't have devices.
Right, because of the device. I know,
But you can modify.
I have brought up e-learning days before, so.
So we did that during COVID, right? Everybody's
Yes.
wondering. So why wouldn't they just say, okay, you guys already went through this?
That, I think you should run for the legislature.
Yes.
Because that is the question that school districts are asking the legislature. Can you give us a break? We did this during COVID, we demonstrated we can do it, why do we need to have an e-learning plan? Can't you just give us flexibility in the calendar? But not yet.
I mean, I think it was in response to the unprecedented, 7 days off of school because of the severe cold in 2018. Because I don't know if it was 2018 or everything is a little fuzzy before COVID, but it was that, I mean, we had a full week of school off plus like the Monday and Tuesday of the following week. And I think that was the response.
Any other questions on the 24-25? And so this is not our last time seeing this.
Correct, we
We're
will
going
bring
to see
this.
it for approval
December.
in December. Okay.
So people, if there were community members watching who wanted to provide comment to us, they certainly could. And we'll look at other school calendars locally and see what sort of schedules we have and bring that back to you. Super. On the 12th.
Okay. Thank you.
And just one other note that we didn't talk about, but we did arrange the end of the semester and the teacher professional development day so that it coincided with the election day. Just it was brought up as a safety and security, not to have our buildings filled with people when we're running programs on that day.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, and then so on our oops, I got to advance. So then we did a first look at, well, what would 25-26 look like if we just rolled that over and tried to do it again? And So what you'd see here is similar thing. There's an opening week. Labor Day is a holiday. We start right after that. No other days in September. We have one of the digital learning days right before Yom Kippur. So at sundown on the 2nd is Yom Kippur, and so Friday the 3rd is a non-instructional day. And then everything else pretty much flows through. You will see a 2-week break in this calendar. So this is like, I think something like 4 out of 6 years. Whenever Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, New Year's Eve, New Year's Day falls on, that Wednesday, Thursday, it ends up being that it's hard to run it any other way.
Can I just ask a question about that? Because it seems like, do we traditionally have the 23rd off? Again, acknowledging that I just have little kids, so I don't know historically how this has been, but to me it seems like it's the same sort of argument, like you could do a 2-day week, the week of December 22nd, and then, because otherwise it's pushing you to the last day of school on June 9th. So I just...
Clearly that would be an option, to have come to school on the 22nd, 23rd, and then that would put the last day for students back on the 5th, and the last day for teachers on the 8th. So, if that's feedback that...
precedent on that, I'm not sure.
Again, like I think we've gone both ways over the years. So it does push, that is late in June, for sure. So this is our first look. Community members who are watching, let us know what your thoughts are.
Who should community members specifically send an email to?
School board at slpschools.org.
Just checking. That's us and not superintendent.
Or Dr. McGuire. Yep.
I don't think I got any questions about the calendar. I got questions about the parent-teacher conferences and the Parent Connect. Those are the only questions that I received.
And I will say that I haven't gotten a lot of feedback about how things are going. I get some from my son, right? About why is it like this? And this doesn't... Whatever, he has lots of opinions about it, I welcome those, but I weigh them differently than I do from the community. But I know that I have heard from, at least from members of the Jewish community, just appreciation for having the holidays and what that means for them. So I have heard that directly.
Yeah. And the high school and middle school work very hard, especially to, these asynchronous days, we're looking out to make sure that things aren't falling, like we're going to do a Family Connect right in the middle of a holiday as well.
Yeah, well, yeah, and I became Ibrahim was saying that the Muslim community is also thankful too. So
the board was, leading on that one as well. So you will notice that it's a little out of balance that it's 88 and 83, which isn't crazy, but we moved the end of the second or the end of the first semester down a week, so to avoid. Because there's Martin Luther King holiday, if we had it up in the normal week there, then we'd have a 2-day week. So we figure 2 4-day weeks is better than a 2 and a 5. So.
Okay. We'll see this again soon too. Okay. Thank you, Director Cryer. Next we have FY23 year-end audit preview. Dr. Magnuson is going to give us the highlights.
Wow. Good evening, Chair Casey, Superintendent McGuire, and members of the board. I am here tonight to give you a little preview of the fiscal year 23 audit. We have not yet closed the books, but tonight I want to give you a preview of where we think our fund balance results will be, and want you to understand what the next steps will be in the budgeting process. There was a memo attached, and I made reference to this is our first year we're closing the books in our new finance system, and as the board knows, we've had significant staff turnover in the business office, and it's given us an opportunity to really review the way we are doing things. And I'll try to, it's nothing dramatic, but I think there are important things that the board should understand about the way that we're displaying the information as far as fund balances go. So this is just a step back at the big picture of the budget timeline. And remember when we were way at the end? of the budget last spring, and now we are back at the beginning doing our data gathering again. We've been meeting, working throughout the fall to close last year's books. We're in the middle of implementing this year's budget and beginning to gather data as we start to build next year's budget. So that little orange star you can see, we're sort of a little more than midway through our data gathering, and we'll have to be getting into budget preparation for next year's budget. So this is the budget timeline as we prepare next year's budget, understanding we're still closing last year and we're implementing this year's budget. I'm just zooming in here a little bit on that data gathering portion so you can see where we're at. We're here tonight previewing audit results. Finance Advisory Committee is meeting again next week. We have begun looking at expenditures and are puzzling a little bit over how to start attacking the behemoth that is expenditures in these public meetings in a way that makes sense. So it's really been interesting conversations, and we have one student who's been involved and will continue to work on that. I don't know how far we'll get this year, but it's really been an interesting process. So we made that commitment to them last year, and we'll continue down that path. We have a tax hearing coming up with the board in the community in December. We may or may not have our audit results, our auditors there on December 12th. If not, we'll do that in January. We did that same thing last year, if you recall. So I want to just preview the audit results here for you. These are sort of the big picture ways that I'm starting to think about the results for last year. That word steady shows up for me. We aren't getting any big windfalls of funding, and there's nothing dire as it compares to the budget. So if we think about our unassigned and unreserved fund balance, we are indeed looking like we will end the year above our board policy minimum of 6%. It appears that we're going to be at 8.71%. That's also steady in comparison to our budget parameter. I just want to call out that the board set a budget parameter of 8%, even though the minimum in your policy 714 is 6%. So we're above that minimum. The school nutrition and community service funds are also steady. I'll talk a little bit more about this, but the school district is the expenditure fiscal host for the community, or for the Children First program. We have moved those funds out of community education, where they have lived, I think, since its inception, and more appropriately moved them into a custodial fund. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Our building construction fund is running strong. It's in alignment with the work that we had planned to date. And our self-funded medical fund balance is growing. So I'll talk a little bit about those, but it shows signs of steadiness. There's nothing emergent or no big windfalls of funding to talk about. This then is just like I did with the timeline, this is a big picture. I don't expect you to read this. This document is in the board packet. But you'll notice up in that top part, there are a lot more details under restricted funds. And we did that so that the board could better understand the types of funding. And I'll spend a little bit of time talking to you about that tonight. You'll see a little more detail also in the community service fund. So this table takes that big old document with all those line items and just shrinks it down into one line item per fund. And I just want you to notice this terminology that we haven't really used here in this district, but we have operating funds and we have non-operating funds. And the three operating funds are basically those where we get revenue and we spend things to operate the school district. And the general fund is one of those operating funds where most of our activity occurs. The school nutrition fund is where we run the school nutrition program. So anything from the doors of the kitchen back have to be paid for out of the school nutrition, or the funds that we get for school nutrition can only be used within that area of the school district. And then the community service fund, where we run our early childhood through lifelong learning programs, including our after-school childcare. So those sort of operate the district. And then there's these other funds that are non-operating. They're either one-time in nature or they aren't a part of our general operations. So you'll see building construction there. debt service, where we service the debt for the bonds that help us build our buildings. We have some internal service funds. That's where you'll find our self-funded dental and medical program. We have a trust and agency fund. This represents the present value of our post-employment benefits, which are no longer in contracts for newer employees as they come into the district. And then this custodial fund. And I just want you to notice, there's small dollar amounts, but these are really important shifts that we're making. And so as you accept audit results, these are how we have closed the books. So we moved balances, a negative balance for Children First, out of the community service fund, which was an operating fund of the district, and moved it instead into a custodial fund, which really portrays what we're doing. We're just holding funds in custody for Children First. Also in custodial funds is a scholarship fund. So we're really just not operating the district with those funds. We're holding them in custody for the family that donated the funds for scholarships.
Can I just, so when we say custodial in essence, we tend to think like maintenance type things, right?
No,
And what
it's just
you're
a UFARS term.
re-emphasizing, because so many things like say school nutrition and we say custodial, it's nothing to do with how we're maintaining or cleaning facilities.
Exactly, thank you. I see custodial and hear UFARS terms, but thank you for reminding me that that's not how the world sees these words. So I would like the board to think about, to start shifting our thinking around operating funds versus non-operating funds. Every line item and every penny is important, and we're tracking them and hold the same internal controls on every line. But to spend, so for instance, if you look at the building construction fund, where we sold $135 million worth of bonds and earned some interest on them this year, and only spent $16 million so far, we have a big fund balance. It's important to separate that from operating, because we cannot use those funds, even if we wanted to, even if our voters said, go right on ahead. We cannot use those funds for general operations of the district, so it's an important distinction to make. That's one example. Next year it will look the opposite, because we won't be selling more bonds, we'll just be spending down that fund balance, and that can often be confusing in a full financial statement. So what I'm going to do now, just look at this operating funds, and I'm just going to dig a little bit more deeply into those. So in the general fund, in total, this just compares our operating funds to the budget. We don't really budget those non-operating funds except for debt service, because we really know exactly what the debt service revenues and expenses will be. So the budget really centers around the operating funds. So this particular slide compares where we budgeted our year-end fund balance to be and where it looks like we'll be ending. So in total, for the general fund, we are $276,000 below where we thought we would be, a little over 2%. And what that means is that our budgeted ending fund balance we had assumed would be at 8.8%. We think we'll be at about 8.7%. So within 10%, within 0.09%. So really close, really good results. The school nutrition fund ran really strongly last year. We'll be ending ahead of budget by $55,000, and then the community service fund is just a slight bit behind budget, but all of the operating funds are really close to budget. So those are steady results. There's nothing remarkable about them. They are steady. And again, just pointing out that those are just your operating funds. And now just look, there's the general fund, and now I'm going to dig that general fund apart to all the components of the general fund. That's where most of the work of the school district happens. So this first snippet is just two categories of the general fund. There's that top line, which is unassigned general fund. That's where board policy lives. And over to the far right, I split up all of the parts of the general fund so that you can see of the total general fund, less than half is unassigned and available for the school board and school district to make decisions about how we will spend the money. Beyond that 41%, everything else is assigned in some way through law or through the way voters approved funding. So the board made some decisions to assign some categories, about 10%. We'll talk about that. This non-spendable is a little bit of funding. We had some items that we paid for in advance, so we have to hold fund balance. So with some bills we had to get paid before this year that we're in, so we just have to hold the fund balance so we don't spend them again. And then there are restricted funds, and I just want you to notice there's $10 million worth of revenue that's restricted. Purposes that we cannot decide about, that if we want the funds, we have to spend them in a specific way. So really more of our funds come in a restricted way than in an unassigned way. I think it's important to understand that little nuance.
And then with the restricted, not only is it that we have to spend it in a certain way, but it also aren't there some restrictions on how much we spend in order to get, right?
Yeah, say more.
I don't know, but you keep talking.
Okay,
And
okay.
The fund will pop up in my head and I'll be like, oh, that's the
Because I'm going to break these apart a little more. So back to, you'll notice there's one line for unassigned, and then there's, so the unassigned, assigned, non-spendable, restricted are the four categories. So this slide shows you the unassigned on the top line. There's nothing more to it. It's the unassigned fund balance. That fund balance is actually growing. And the biggest reason for that is that the current year's budget is not in a deficit mode as much as it has been in previous years. So we're able to release that amount of funds that the board assigns for the budget deficit for the next year. We were able to release that to just $261,000. So that's all that's happening. We're just moving something that the board had assigned to protect us against future deficits into an unassigned fund balance. There's no more money. It's just the money in that fund balance has shifted. And when we calculate the board's percentage, after the advice of the finance committee maybe 3 years ago, we combine those two anyway because we don't want to count that against us. A future budget deficit against that calculation. So that's good news. And something that we knew as we built this year's budget, that we were trying to get those revenues and expenses back in line. A new category, it's a small amount, but it's really important to the day-to-day operations of the district. We're trying to get a better handle on donations and gifts and local grants, and we've been talking about that. So we're setting aside just $43,000 from last year that were little donations or gifts that someone went out and got and received, and a generous donor gave those to us. And instead of just burying them into the unassigned fund balance, we want to honor the reason for the gift and continue to track it into next year. It adds a little bit of accounting work for us, but it's really important to honor the reasons for those gifts and make sure that we're tracking them really well. So we're recommending that as a part of the board's assigned fund balances, we continue to assign at the end of a school year, recognizing that money is there in that fund balance. It ought not be just thrown to the winds. There's no law that says you can't do that. And so we're just saying, let's keep track of that in a better way.
Do most donations come with like, oh, I'd like for it to be spent on this such and such?
Sometimes, yeah, sometimes, and within law, we can spend those donations in that way. It's often like a grant someone will go out and get for nutrition or for doing something positive in the school, and so they'll have little events in the school that will be held, and maybe spend $500 of the $1,000, and then there's $500 that just disappears. Not a big deal to the general fund, but to a school that could have $500 worth of mental health supports, that's gives them something that they went out and got the grant for. It's those kinds of things. We wouldn't accept grants that violate the law or purchase things that have tails, like technology that we would have to replace in 5 years, that kind of thing. We have a fund set aside for future severance payments, and I want you to notice, this is a little bit complicated. I've told Dr. McGuire the story and told her I think the board should understand this. We are using $580,000 worth of the severance payments, and it's a decision, it's a recommendation I guess I'm making, and a decision I made as we were closing the books. We were not planning to do that in the budget. We were only planning to spend about $250,000. And here's why. In the expenditures budget, there's a bill for about $300,000 worth of unemployment benefits, not associated with the summer program, but associated with the backlog of COVID unemployment. And we were instructed to not pay that bill for a couple of cycles. And we got to the point where now we have to start paying that bill. And you might remember back when we set the preliminary levy in September, our levy went up by that amount because we are allowed to levy for 100% because it's sort of a self-insured unemployment fund. But as you might recall from our Finance 101, the levy for this fall isn't revenue until next year. So I've got the expense sitting here, and the revenue doesn't come this year, it comes next year. And so I sat down with the auditors and said, I want to take that money and I want to, we call it advance recognize, I want to bring it past this year and into last year. And then somebody's got to remember it was there. And then we got to remember to do the accounting right and that we get the budgets right so we don't accidentally lose $300,000 in the process. So we were ready to set up all of those accounts and, document it for posterity, and decided why not instead use our severance fund and not do all these gyrations with accounting. Make it clear the bill was this year, the revenue's coming in the future. So then a future board could make a decision to assign revenue. So we could, as we're building next year's budget, make a decision to replenish that severance account. I just want you to be aware of that. We know that that's more than we said we would use in the budget, but that's why. It was to not make a bunch of complicated accounting moves.
So does that mean that will adjust the levy that we're ultimately putting?
No, the levy will look back and go, did you spend the money? And in the levy system, we'll see that we spent the money in unemployment last year, so the revenue will come. It just doesn't come for 2 years past the time when the expense hit. So this year's budget was, we were going to have a lower fund balance by $300,000 for revenue that's coming in 2 years. So instead of jumping through the accounting hoops to line the revenue and expense up, we're using a fund balance that the board has assigned to close that gap. And it's just a recommendation I'm making because I don't think it's a good practice to move funds around like that and try to remember from one year to the next what we were thinking. So it's something that we can talk about as we build next year's budget, whether we want to make that intention. I want to do a little more digging into what our future liability is around severance to give the board a better recommendation. I'm not prepared to do that tonight about the sufficiency of that dollar amount.
And we have that, we have that severance in case we have to pay out something for somebody.
It's for severance that is in contract. So we do, this amount actually represents the dollar amount of severance payments that were made. These aren't payouts to people. These are contractual amounts that folks are paid as they leave the district in old contract language that has severance associated with it. And then the last one is ATPPS, which is the QComp program, Alternative Teacher Professional Pay System, is what ATPPS stands for. There's no statutory requirement to reserve that fund balance. We assign it to track the spending within that category, and you can see that we had been running a deficit amount and continue to in ATPPS, but we are starting to catch up a little bit at a time, and our goal is to close that gap and continue to assign that. There's no statutory authority to reserve it, but we have recommended in the past that the board assign it, and we're continuing that recommendation. So that's those amounts. The prepaid accounts, all we're doing is holding fund balance because we've paid a bill that belongs to next year, and we can't spend that money. And that is a requirement. That's called a non-spendable account. So that's unassigned and assigned. Now there's 2 pages then of restricted funds. And in the past, we hadn't shown all of these as line items. We've always shown the capital projects, the technology levy. That's the voter-approved technology levy. That fund balance is growing. And we are fortunate to have held a fund balance as we meet future technology needs And all of our technology staff is paid for from the capital projects levy, in addition to equipment and Wi-Fi and all of the things that keep our technology running. And as costs for staff increase, we are going to need that fund balance over time. And that fund balance did grow this year. There's the long-term facility maintenance fund that's within the general fund. There's a small amount of funding that we still are not on par with other districts around us with our access to LTFM funding. But we do carry a fund balance there, so that's things like we have to make a repair to a building, an HVAC system has a problem, it's maintenance types of things. Operating capital, and again, these are restricted, so the funds come for a purpose, we can only spend it for that purpose. Operating capital is curriculum, textbooks, materials, musical instruments, band uniforms, athletic uniforms, those types of things. We've carried a large fund balance and have been spending it down gradually over time, and we talk about that every spring, and there's specific line items set aside within operating capital. Then there's some categories where you'll see that we spend exactly the amount that we receive, and that's because we do not want to carry, if we get reserve types of funding, we want to make sure we're spending the reserve funding and not carrying these weird fund balances when these are categories that we can spend down completely. So basic skills is one of those categories. The majority of that is compensatory funding that comes for schools in the most poverty in the district. And so what we do is make sure that we expend specifically the amount to spend on the revenue. We can't go into the negative, so we have to do some splitting of teachers' salaries, and then the rest of the spending goes into the general unassigned fund balance. Medical assistance is a program that we get funding for Medicaid type funding for services provided in the district. Some nurses' salaries are paid for from that. Staff development is assigned specifically for staff development. We spend more than this on staff development. The rest of that cost goes in the general fund. Unassigned, we can't bring it into the negative. Learning and development is about class size reduction. That's some language that's been in statute for 20 or more years. So we assign some specific staff to keep our class sizes where they are at. There's a little bit of area learning center funding for specific types of programming for students. Gifted and talented, we get a teeny tiny amount of funding. Has to be spent on gifted and talented. We spend more than that. We spend more than that on our talent development program. The rest of that goes to unrestricted general fund. Achievement and integration is for our approved desegregation program. Integration program, we have to spend, again, the exact dollar amount, can't go into the deficit. The Safe Schools levy is, as it sounds, specifically for safe schools. We can use that for counselors and guidance. Some districts use that for police liaison officers. We do not pay for police liaison officers or our plan that's in place right now. I can't remember what it's called, but we don't pay for that here. Juvenile resource officers. We have not had to do that here in our district, so we can use those funds for other things. And then we have student activity accounts that are accounts, we closed a few of those a couple of weeks ago at a board meeting for inactivity, but those are accounts set up by students for students. And we shouldn't, in general, be carrying a fund balance, but like grants and donations, there are things that carry over fiscal years.
Can I just also ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
So am I understanding this or remembering it correctly from the Financial Advisory Committee? The folks on the committee wanted a little bit more of a line item to understand where those funds are going. And so part of the ask that they had was to have more line item. So that's, you're wondering where that came from? That was my remembrance.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't need to go so far as to say like, what are they spending in each classroom? But they wanted kind of more clarity on what this is for.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And I think it's important for a board to understand, 2 pages of restricted funds. That's a lot. It's a lot to keep track of in the business office and it's a lot of mandated types of spending that we aren't free to then make decisions as a board about.
Well, and what I appreciated about what Patricia did for the last two financial advisory committee meetings is that it does help us to understand the story of our district and how we spend our money, because I think that I know I did, thought that, oh, well, it's like my house budget. So if I have a leaky roof, I can move money around, or if I want to take a vacation, I can move money around. But there's a lot, because of the restricted fund, you can't do that. And so I think that this very clearly shares with our community members the story of our district and the story of our money. Because I think a question that came up at the meeting was, where do we spend our money? Like how is this possible that we pass levies and we pass referendums? Like, how is it possible that we can go into a deficit and things like this? And I think so I commend you and I applaud you, and I'm full of gratitude for you, because I have learned so much, but I think also Patricia puts it in a way it's very accessible for people who don't deal. I mean, we're really lucky we have Mike, who is he's a tax attorney, or accountant. So that's really helpful, but it's also helpful for people who are, I was a lit major. So this was very, very helpful for me to understand school finance.
Anybody can understand and love school finance.
I'm not going to go so there's just a love relationship, but I love Chaucer. You love finance. It's okay.
So then I just want to reiterate. That I think these results are steady. I'm not jumping up and down, because we are not. We are close to having a balanced budget. It is not balanced for this year. And our revenue is set at a 2% increase next year. So we will jump into a deficit again, possibly. So we just have to be really cautious about these results. I think they're steady. They're what we had thought they would be. So there's that. Next steps in the budgeting process. So if I could get 23 off my back, I was telling Rick earlier today, if we could get that year to go away, we could start to really concentrate on these next 2 years. So we need to get this year's budget updated, fiscal year 2024. The first thing will be, we'll take last year's ending balance and start this year with these new balances. And that's going to have an impact on how we end this year. We're studying enrollment right now, and the impact of current year's enrollment on this year's revenue. You might recall we set last year's budget based on a 2% increase in state aid, and made the commitment we are not going to increase the budget because it's just too much to try to build that in. And knowing that we're deficit spending, we got a 4% increase, and we're going to need every penny of that to make sure we don't continue to deficit spend. So we made the recommendation of the board as a finance advisory committee that we don't spend into these funds that we receive, that we use them prudently for future years' budgets. We'll be really looking at school nutrition revenues and expenditures, because the way revenues are coming in are completely different this year for school nutrition, because now state and federal funds cover the cost of our pattern meals. We don't have to, families don't have to pay even if they don't qualify for free and reduced lunch. So we have to update all of that once we have a new pattern set for how that revenue and expense comes in, and we're starting to learn more. We are settling contracts, and so we've got to get those dollar amounts built into the budget. And then there's other market-based operating costs that we just want to make sure we were on track in our budget setting for transportation, utilities, property and liability insurance. So we'll be updating this year's budget and then starting to think about next year. The basic funding formula is set in law at 2%. Now, there's a chance that something different could happen. There'll be an inflationary concept, but that doesn't start until fiscal 26. So next year's budget is at 2%. Enrollment projections will be an important part of revenue and expense funding. We'll be talking about fees in our operating funds. So last year we added community ed fees to the board budget parameters in the spring. We'll do that again, along with the general fund. Class size guidelines, we've been holding them steady for 5 years that I've been here. So, will we be able to afford that, to continue to hold our class sizes? We set a contingency every year, and then we'll set the fund balance limit. Do we spend it down to 6%? Do we try to hold at 8%? Do we try to increase fund balance? Those are the conversations we'll have at Finance Advisory and bring those recommendations to you. And then there's other things. We still continue to settle contracts, so we'll have to build in a cost for contracts and all of those other market-based items again. So lots of budgeting coming. And this, I am just taking us back to where we are here tonight, where we're previewing audit results. So that's a lot, and if we had study sessions, I wouldn't have to do this in a board meeting, but I'm thankful that you take the time to understand that.
Yeah, as I always say, thank you. To make it simple for complex topic. So, for my understanding is non-operating fund generally refer to not day-to-day operation, right?
Right, exactly.
So
the operating funds are for, yeah.
So my question is, how are the non-fund operating distributed or utilized?
The non-operating funds?
Yeah.
So the major non-operating fund is the building construction fund. So that's the voter-approved bond issue. We sold bonds, got $135 million. We invested, and we're earning pretty good interest on those funds right now. So that sits in a specific non-operating reserved fund, and it's exclusively for building construction. So that's the major one. The other major non-operating fund is debt service. So when the voters approve a bond issue, we go out and sell bonds, and then we have to pay them back. And that happens in debt service, and that's like the mortgage payment, the principal and interest payment. So every year we have a tax levy, that's what the voters approved. These tax levies for 15 years, 20 years. So the principal and interest payments. Custodial accounts are the other non-operating fund. That will now be Children First, and then scholarships. Medical and dental, we are self-insured in the district for medical and dental. So we bring the premiums in and disperse them internally, and we hold those in an internal service fund. So they're very specific and not for general operations of the district. Did that answer?
Is there any reporting mechanism for those?
Those will always be reported on the fund balances, and they're a part of the audit.
Director Mancini saying itemize.
Yes, yeah, there's line items for every one of those non-operating funds as well. I'm trying to get back to that page. So every one of those have specific line items, and there's no difference between how we treat them accounting-wise, but I think it's an important distinction about how we think about them as we fund the district and operate the district. So every line item is scrutinized and goes through the same internal control process in the business office.
So my last question is the success and the impact of the non-operation. So now you say you move Children First, right?
Mm-hmm.
Custodial.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to understand that.
Yeah, so it's an accounting transfer, but since we made the agreement, I don't know, decades ago, to hold
30.
Yeah, to be the fiscal host for the expenditures for Children First, which just means that we bring in the revenue that comes from Park Nicollet Foundation or from donations for Children First into, for some reason, the Community Service Fund that I don't know the history on, but into the Community Service Fund, and it was always reserved in the Community Service Fund. It really isn't part of our operations, so really didn't belong there. So we finally just decided we've got to get that moved into more properly a custodial fund, which properly assigns it into a custodial account. Probably really doesn't belong there either. We ought not be holding those kinds of funds in the district, and we should be working toward that, but it gets it out of an operating fund. We always accounted for them as a reserved balance within community ed, within community service fund.
Could another way of looking at custodial, and I might just be thinking of in terms of like education and childcare, but custodial is like it's caretaking, it's taking care of. Like a custodial, if somebody has custodial rights over a minor, it means that they have essentially the same thing as a parent, the parental right, but they're not blood related necessarily. So custodial just means that we're taking care of it.
And we have no authority about the decision-making around it. And as long as they run through school district books, they are subject to every law and regulation and internal control that we hold for every other fund. So rest assured, we're not purchasing things through any of these funds, even custodial funds that wouldn't meet the letter of the law or board policy.
Thank you.
Couple of things. You know that I've been a champion for this, but the long-term facilities maintenance, I talk about it a lot. And
Yes.
you kind of went past it really quickly and said it's not the same as other people. That's because of by law.
Exactly.
It's not the same.
Exactly.
Like we are limited because of an old law. So that's something that I know that I keep bringing up to like our school board organizations to say, can we get this changed? Because it's really outdated.
Mm-hmm.
And so we are really limited in what we can do because of a law that was created 25, 30, whatever years ago to help address an issue that I think really no longer exists. And so that's a hard thing for us to sort of get around. And the second thing that I was going to say, sort of related to that, is when I was door knocking and I was meeting people at the door and they say, what's the biggest issues for your school? And I say, well, one's going to be money. And I said, because, and the question comes, well, you got the windfall. And I'm like, it was a windfall in many ways, but it was just making up for what we had lost, right? So it's really hard for people to swallow. They're like, you got so much money. Why are you saying you're still at a deficit or still likely to be at a deficit or all of that stuff? And I said, because it's just scratching the surface, right? So I know that, that's a goal of the legislature is to keep people lobbying the legislature to keep that going and keep that discussion going. But I just want that to really be fresh in people's minds too, that we're doing what we can with what we got here, but it's still not enough. And I don't know, maybe the thought is if we can do it gradually, then we can get there and people won't notice it, but it's really hard in the meantime. It really makes tough decisions and that we have to face. So that's the end of my quasi-political rant there.
Anything else? All right, thank you. And we'll see you again next month.
Mm-hmm.
And we have our truth and taxation hearing at 6 o'clock at our next meeting on December 12th.
Thank you.
All right. Our superintendent search, reviewing the MSBA Executive Search Services proposal. We have Barb here from MSBA again. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Do you kind of just want to start? Do you want me to cue you up a little bit, or do you want to start?
I'll give you a choice. So first of all, Chair Casey, members of the board, Dr. McGuire, thank you so much for inviting me to be here tonight to talk about your upcoming superintendent search. We really appreciate the opportunity to answer any and all questions you might have about our proposal. So I could do a couple of things. I know you've seen the proposal, I could go through it at a very high level. I know you don't want me to read every page of 36 pages to you, but I could go through and highlight some things and you could ask questions along the way, or you could simply start asking me questions so that I'm sure to address everything you're interested in learning about from the proposal. So I could do a very short presentation, or we could simply dive into what do you need to know about the proposal in order to make an informed decision.
I'd say all of the information that you're talking, that you would go through is public information, would be available online too.
Absolutely.
So if we were trying to decide for the sake of people's time, whether it's a value to present the information, it is fully available. It's pretty long, but that's, I think that it includes a lot of detail in there too, so.
No, I'm fine. I read it. It's fine. I didn't have any questions. I would have written them down.
So for the sake of time, I'm okay with sort of launching in personally into some questions, but I think.
Okay, with other folks okay with just starting with questions? Okay. I will just say, I was not at our last board meeting where you all shared your hopes and dreams, and I really appreciated reading through all of those and seeing the alignment, I think, of people's hopes and dreams. And so you kind of informally, I think, agreed to ask for a proposal from MSBA. And so Dr. McGuire and I have chatted with Barb about this, and I believe that what I'm seeing in this proposal really meets the hopes and dreams of, or will allow us to meet the hopes and dreams of the board members. So that is why I'm just wanting to bring Barb here to discuss this tonight. So why don't you guys just jump in with questions?
If I may.
Yes.
I just maybe one or maybe 2 minutes quick presentations for the public.
Okay, so some high-level overview of what's in here without necessarily referring to pages.
Yeah,
Okay, great. Thank you for asking. I appreciate that. I think what's in this proposal, if I were to summarize it with some adjectives, I would say that our search services, our process that we use is inclusive, it is transparent, it is collaborative, it is well-managed, and above all, it is student-centered. All of those pieces come to life in the process, and I try to summarize it in 36 pages. But that's what we're all about. We also believe in school boards, and believe in school boards understanding their districts far better than we ever could. So we are very adaptive in what we can offer. So there is some scaffolding in here of what a search looks like. We have a process that we believe in, that we feel is outstanding, and yet it is flexible enough to meet the needs of what you might want in particular to be offered or included in the St. Louis Park search. We also believe that you can handle seeing private data. So we will share with you all of the application materials for all of the applicants for this position. We'll work with you to understand what is private data and what you need to be careful of because you're discussing private data in a public meeting. And yet, we believe that you have the right to see those. We will do all of the vetting, checking, pre-interviews, and bring to you some recommended candidates we feel align with your leadership profile. And yet ultimately, because you've seen all of the applications, you're welcome to ask questions of us about certain candidates that we maybe are not recommending as one of the finalists, and you could move them forward. You certainly do not have to do everything MSBA might recommend. Our main goal is to empower you to own this process, answer your questions, provide information, and then be there when you need us in any facet that you feel is necessary. So that was a little longer than 2 minutes, but I hope that was okay. Thank you.
I might have some questions, but things that I appreciated about the proposal. Maybe I'll have a question as I go through it. But I mean, I think there's a whole page that talks about race equity and commitment to DE&I and things related to that. So I would call that out for people who'd want to take a look at that to say, does this reflect? Personally, I thought it reflected what we talk about, and so I was happy with that. But I encourage other people to take a look at it. There is we've talked about, you just said, we'll have access to public or to private data. That's the board. I just want to make it clear that's not the public. So there is a part of this that is, because we're a board, we get access to certain information, and we want this to be transparent, but that doesn't mean everybody gets to see everything, right? So there's just reasons why, legally, why we would see some information other people would not, and why I think we don't announce until we get to a finalist stage who are the finalists. So just making that clear to people. I like that we have you talk in there. There's some options for us in terms of that you would do some Q&A with the community as what the search looks like. That was really kind of interesting to me. That gives an opportunity for the community to ask questions directly to you, right? To you as an organization. That seems really great. They're not talking to us about that, but they're saying, how are you going to do this search? And I thought that was really nice. I think similarly, there's some comments about forums and the ability to have some focus groups and what those costs are and stuff and all of that. And so we can balance that out and think about how we can reach certain stakeholder groups. So all those things were really stuck out to me. And then I was like, I printed out the proposed timeline because I'm really nervous about this, right? I'm like, we have a short time. Dr. McGuire is gracing us with this extra time out of her retirement in this moment of need. But we need to get somebody in here for, not only because she's leaving, but because we need to set things up for next year. And as I look through this, it's like, okay, I'm getting a sense of how this works, right? How we're laying this out. And maybe even if I was doing something like this, or we're still to hear from our communications department about stuff, where are the people sort of, where does the community get to enter into that and calling that out? Because again, that's a transparent thing that I think we want to make sure that people understand. Where are those input points for them? So those are a few things that come to mind that when I read through this, I was like, and then there's a list of other things, but I just, there's other things in there too, but those were things that I liked and appreciated.
I thought it was very helpful and very thorough. Really, it's 36 pages as an overview, and I want to agree. I think as somebody who's never been through this, it really helped give some context to what we're going to embark on. I wondered if you could talk a little bit. I did read the page about DEI and sort of the alignment with our strategic mission, strategic plan here at SLP, but I wonder if you could talk about how that might show up specifically in the superintendent search process.
Great question. Thank you, Director Davis. We are on a journey at MSBA as an organization to continue to strengthen our understanding of educational equity across the state of Minnesota. We serve 331 districts with varying degrees of addressing equity issues, and we are trying to be as progressive as we can to ensure that every student in every district has the opportunity for a quality education in Minnesota's public school systems. So we are internally working on some things toward better understanding our journey as individual staff persons, our publications, our events, our communications, our services with an equity lens. I think superintendent search has given us an opportunity to be relatively at the forefront of that because our history of doing searches is not 100 years old, as MSBA is. Our history is 13 or 14 years of doing searches. And so in the search, what we tend to look for is helping our boards understand bias in terms of the screening process for your applicants, in terms of the questions that you are asking of candidates in the interviews, in understanding the answers candidates are giving, and in working with your stakeholders. One of the things that I was so pleased with to see, and I'm excited to hear Rachel present next, is the intentionality of the communications plan with that lens in St. Louis Park is phenomenal, truly outstanding. And so in working with stakeholders in particular, one of the things that we have learned is that the way searches have always been done does not mean they need to always be done that way. It's not always the best way. Focus groups historically have had the intention of including people and the impact of excluding people. And so we've started offering them as an a la carte option early in the search, in addition to the survey. In our survey, we learned a lot during the pandemic about the value of that as a qualitative and a quantitative tool to gather survey. So it's in Somali, it's in Spanish, and it's in English. It's online, and it's in hard copies. And we get the hard copies out there to communities who may not want to, nor can, for whatever reason, use computers. So very inclusive with that survey. With the stakeholders early on in the process, the timeline I've suggested to Director Cox's question does indicate that the school board could create hiring criteria and from that develop a leadership profile in order to potentially post the vacancy before the end of the year. I don't know that you need to wait for the amount of potential stakeholder focus groups, listening sessions, survey results to come in before crafting that leadership profile. I think it can happen simultaneously. And then using that stakeholder input to help you as board members screen the applications and look for what you are intending to bring forth as finalists. We use it in that regards also because we'll simultaneously be doing that vetting. And that stakeholder input needs to be included in the creation of the interview questions. So I'm not convinced that you need to wait for all of that involvement to be done before you could post this position, which is why it's about a 3.5-month timeline, including a lot of work to be done in December. And then when you get to your interviews as well, you can use bias training if you'd like us to do that around interview bias and what that might look like for you. If you do want interview committees involved in some way, shape, or form, we want to work with those individuals, not only to make sure they adhere to the legality that's required in the superintendent search because you are an EEOC employer. So if you do have interview committees made up of stakeholders, we want to make sure that they are prepared to not ask questions that are on the don't ask list and things such as that. We'll talk to them about bias. We'll talk about the rating scales that all of you will be using, whether it's stakeholders or board members in the interview process. Your deliberations, we want to continue to use that equity lens as well. I think for every district it's different. And there are districts that are more interested in the particular page that you have both called out than others. And this is a district that is very engaged in racial equity work. And so here we would be doing the absolute best we can, and I think we would learn some things along the way from working with your district in that regard as well, because we are on our own journey. That was a long answer, Director Davis. Did I answer that appropriately?
You did, thank you. I have a follow-up that I hope to be relatively short, but, and I don't know how much you can share, but I wonder to what degree does your team that's reflected on here, the search team, reflect diverse identities?
The search leads, I think it's on pages 22, 23, and 24. You can see our resumes. Craig Morris, John Ward, and myself would be the leadership team for this search. And we are 2/3 identified as white and 1/3 as BIPOC on the leadership team. And then the additional folks whose resumes are on here are MSBA staff and service providers who are superintendents and former board members, and they are majority white. Thank you.
Presumably cisgendered.
Yes.
As well.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. Not necessarily, no.
The only thing I would add, and because I think this is lovely, just from, I shared it with Patricia, and I don't, maybe I'm totally wrong, but it's a really competitive market out there right now. And so, right, I mean, from a teacher's perspective, there's a lot of job openings. And there's not a lot of teachers, and there's not a lot of superintendents out there, and I think there are a lot of openings. I don't know if it's the same as the superintendent, but I know in the, for administrators and teachers, there's a lot of job openings out there. So I think doing simultaneously, engaging community to get input as far as what we might be looking for when they answer them, is a good thing, but also developing that leadership profile early to get it posted and get it going. Mm-hmm. I'm a little nervous because there's just not a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. To that point, can you speak to that in terms of like where do you usually see these superintendents coming from? Like I think we mentioned it briefly at our last meeting or whatever, but it's like this is the time, right, where people are sort of looking. They have contracts close to expiring. There's assistant superintendents who are looking to make the leap. Are you getting any sense of that? Do you have a general sense about like what does that candidate pool look like, generally speaking, or I don't know. Like I'm just thinking about that. So.
Right. I think you'll have a very strong pool, St. Louis Park. It's my personal opinion. Pools are smaller. When I started doing this almost 5 years ago, we would see on average 20 to 30 applications per opening, regardless of where it was in the state. Now the pools range anywhere from 4 to perhaps 25. It depends on location is big. Location, reputation of the district, particularly in terms of relationship between the board team, and salary. Last year, about 54% of the people who were placed in Minnesota were first-time superintendents, so there are a lot of emerging leaders. Previously, it was a lot of sitting superintendents that might move. Now there are fewer sitting superintendents seeking new opportunities. There are some. There are a lot of phenomenal administrators looking for the opportunity to lead as a superintendent. So I can't predict the future, but I can tell you that this is a very exciting opportunity to many administrators. And smaller pools are not necessarily a bad thing. I would say when we had 30 applicants per position, about half of them were not ready for the job. Perhaps didn't even have a license and just threw their hat in the ring. Now the people in the pool are committed. They want the job as a superintendent. They know how difficult it is. So I would say the quality of the pool has gone up, although the quantities have gone down. My observation.
There's just, I mean, just in general, there's just fewer administrators out there. And I was just talking to mine, and if an administrator had to leave the building and had to put somebody in charge, there was at least 5 teachers in the building who also had their administration license. And in one of my buildings, there's no teacher who has their administrative license. And then at the high school level, there's like 2. So, I mean, there's just, there's a shortage of educators right now.
And in response to that, Director Mancini, we are beginning to craft succession planning services to help boards develop exactly what you're talking about. What is the plan, not necessarily just for the superintendency, but for the administration of the district. So we're in the early stages of putting together a workshop on succession planning, so you're correct.
I know this really great retired superintendent who can probably help you with that.
I'm doing my part to try to.
That's what I was gonna say. I mean, maybe for the sake of other people, like in the audience or watching at home, you're doing some things to help. Like there's a superintendent organizations and other sort of administrative organizations that do use an emerging leader. So it's not like we bring somebody in, they're emerging leader, and we see how they do.
Right.
There's some efforts out there to build cohorts out there, to build some energy, to use people like Dr. McGuire. When we release her back to her retirement time, she'll have plenty of time for to do all of this work. But also, but one thing that I was going to point out in your proposal too is that I don't know how extensive this is, so maybe you can speak to it. You said you do a year check-in. You come back and ask them, the board member or the superintendent, after you replace them, you do like a 1-year check-in, and am I right? And can you speak to that?
Almost right.
Okay.
So we have what we call a transition workshop, and the new superintendent would start July 1, 2024. So we would like them to get their feet under them in about 2 months, and then at some point that fall, we want to come back and meet with the new board team. And we do a transition workshop where we talk about what that first year is going to look like as far as expectations of one another. What are you expecting from them that first year? What can they expect from you in terms of support? Do your goals as a board align with the goals you're going to help them set? Do you want to use performance evaluation measures that are based on standards and elements? Do you want to craft some goals? Not too many, because their first year, you can overwhelm them with goals, and then you evaluate them and they've done everything halfway. So we talk a lot about prioritization that first year for them so that they can be successful. And that's usually in the fall. So the fall of 24 is when we would do that. And then we would come back as needed if you need us to further develop the performance evaluation process with your board team.
So it's not like you place it and you're like, good luck, see you later.
No,
right?
no. No. In fact, we're speaking in January or February. We're speaking at one of the elementary principals conferences on the superintendency. What is it? What does it involve? How to stay in it? What are board expectations? So we're trying already to help develop people who are serving as principals, and we're continuing to add to, I think, our repertoire of trying to ensure strong administrators so that boards can be successful. It's a partnership. You need to work together with them. So.
Other questions? How do you think? Yeah. I know it's late. I want to go, but I think it's important. Stakeholder input. I know there's a lot of barrier. So how you gonna engage with that?
That's a wonderful question, thank you. So on page, I will at least for a moment point to that, there's a page on stakeholder involvement.
47.
7?
Page
47.
40, okay. Oh, and on your, boy, in my proposal. All right, on my proposal, it's page 3.
Okay.
Thank you.
I download the book.
Okay, 47, I'm like, wow, okay. So stakeholders, there's opportunities for stakeholder input in the beginning of the search and again toward the end of the search. So in the beginning of the search, some of the ways that they are involved are through the Q&A session, which we started doing about 2 years ago. So we would work with your communications team to get the word out a week or so before that session that people can submit questions in advance that they want answered about the search process. We schedule it usually for 4 o'clock on a Wednesday or a Thursday outside of contract hours and such, and yet we know not everyone can come at 4 o'clock on that day. So we record the session and we ask for those questions to be submitted in advance because we want to answer every question that stakeholders may have about the process to ensure accurate and very transparent information is shared. During that session, and it's not a board meeting, you all don't need to be there, and sometimes it's better if board members don't sit in because people might be asking questions. They submit them anonymously in the chat. They don't ask them verbally on the Q&A. But they might not want to ask everything if they do see a board member or two on that session, but you will watch it later when it's recorded. So we'll answer questions live during the session. We'll share the timeline, what's happening, when it's happening, and why it's happening that way. We'll share the vacancy brochure. Let people know where it's posted, what is in the brochure. It'll be a leadership profile, it'll be a timeline, it'll be points of pride for the district and for the community, and how to apply. And then we'll share the stakeholder survey, and we'll walk folks through this is what it looks like. Here's the questions. It's hard copy, it's online, it's in 3 languages, and then we answer all of those questions. We record that, and it's anywhere from about 35 minutes to maybe an hour, but not usually more than that. And then the next day or so, when it uploads to YouTube, we'll get it to the district to put on the website, on the landing page for the search. So that's available for the entire 3.5 or 4 months of the search.
Are you guys collecting the demographics of the search?
We certainly can. If you would like us to add demographics into the survey, stakeholder survey, we can do that. We typically don't because, again, every district is so different. And yet if you want to know those things, we will talk about the self-identifiers people use as far as their if they are a parent or staff or a caretaker, whatever it might be. And if you'd like us to collect demographic information, race, ethnicity, age, we can certainly include that in the survey too.
And I think that's going to help us to see how inclusive we are.
Yep, excellent point. Excellent point. So then the other thing I'd like to talk about early on is, it's not in my proposal, but early on, actually before the Q&A, we would like to meet with your administrators and your cabinet members to share information about the search, answer their questions, and ask for their help to get people involved. We'd also like to meet with the leadership of your bargaining units early on to explain the process, answer their questions, ask for their help to get people involved. And then there's the Q&A. And then the other way to involve people, well, the focus groups and such, Rachel's going to talk about the suggestions you have in this plan. Again, just incredible. We would obviously do whatever the district would like, but the ideas that are in that plan are spot on. Later in the search, toward the end, you can involve stakeholders again at the interview phase. Typically, it's the second round when you're down to perhaps 2 or 3 candidates. You could do it in the first round if you'd like. You could have the separate interview committees. You could have informal meet and greets with the candidates on that day where people can come and meet them and just visit informally. You could do Q&A sessions with them where we would collect questions from the audience and read them to make sure that they're legal, and then we would ask candidates to respond 1 candidate at a time. You wouldn't have 2 or 3 in the room. So use a lot of ways to structure the input at the end. Also, you could have stakeholders from different representative groups watch your interview and then provide feedback electronically to us on strengths and opportunities for growth that you would read before you begin deliberating who you'd like to move forward or who you'd like to hire. So it's not ever asking them who should we hire, because you don't want to set people up to be disappointed that, they're not the hiring committee. You're the hiring authority, that's it. But you would like to hear from them about the interviews highlights, lowlights, things like that. And finally, one of my favorite ways to involve stakeholders is to have students help give the tours in round 2. And so if there are students that are interested in chaperoning the 2 or 3 people around the district, obviously they would take them to buildings. You want someone from the district to drive to the different buildings. You don't want students driving. They could, however, represent your district and speak with the candidates and get to know them. And then the building administrator would take over and give the tour, and the students would visit along with them. That's one of my favorite ways of getting the student voice in the search process, and they tend to absolutely love it as well. That was a lot. Director Ibrahim, I hope that was okay.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanna thinking deeply, when I say barrier to those who have digital literacy who can do this, but I know you are sending hard copies. Some people even they can write it too. But I know district have tools, so I think that Wire also can facilitate that. We have 2 liaisons too.
Liaisons who could assist and other mechanisms for translation.
I know that we did the Q&A sessions, right? That's what we did last time when Dr. Osai was hired. Was that like towards the end? Was Q&A sessions that we did last time. And I remember sitting in just observing some of those, but I don't know if we ever got any community feedback about that process and how that went. But anyways, it can be a conversation we have at another point, but I do remember that. That was what we did last time. So.
Any other questions?
I'm impressed with the video, or at least listening in and then giving the feedback during the final interview process. It's interesting. New tools.
Lots of new tools. One of the things that's very important to us is continuous improvement. So the last 4 or 5 years in particular, we've learned so much about search processes and what we can do to make sure that they are more flexible to meet school board's needs without violating the open meeting law or the Government Data Practices Act. There are a lot of things I think that you will have an opportunity to select from that will match the process that's going to really bring you what you're looking for. It's not going to be my search, it's going to be your search. So,
if we decide to do the workshop, when do we need to make that decision? And do we all do it together, I'm assuming?
are you talking about?
I know, I don't have I don't know what the Wi-Fi is, the hiring workshop.
So just for a moment, I'll address that if that's okay. So you have the option to participate in this if you would like to. It's included at no cost. And this workshop is intended to serve every member of MSBA that might be facing a search. It is not specific to our services. If, however, you participated in this as part of a search, I can customize the information I share about here's what we will be doing, because MSBA's process is different than what some districts use when they conduct their own search, or it's different when they work with another search firm. So this is a generic workshop that is intended to give you some really great foundational information. I brought these along. I don't know if and when you might want them, but there's a booklet that goes along with it. And you could take this at any point starting tonight just to read. And it's also a lot of pages.
You're going to memorize that?
But you could if you want, because some of us are left-brained, some are right-brained. So some people would want to read this thoroughly and take notes. We could do the workshop in conjunction with your planning meeting. And the workshop could be maybe the first hour, because the planning meeting will build upon what's in here. That's intended to set that stage. Or you could skip it, because the search itself is the workshop spread out over 3 or 4 months. It's just this gives you all of it up front so you know what to expect. Some people like that, some people don't.
I suggest that we all take the packet and look through it and think about it. Like, do you think that this is something you would want? And if there's anybody that feels strongly that they want it, we will do it. And if everyone's like, no, this feels okay, we feel supported, that's fine, then we don't have to. But, so look through it, browse through that, and let me know. And we also have one of our incoming board members in the room, and I'd like for him to help one of those if we can.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think there's enough for that.
Yes, hysterical tonight. I'm laughing so hard on the inside, I just can't tell.
You can. Oh, man. Okay, any other questions for Barb?
That was great.
We're going to talk about this briefly again on our action agenda. So
Great. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
I do appreciate a chance to answer your questions.
You still have the same email, right? If you have it.
I do. Yes. bdorn@mnmsba.org. And my phone number, my email address would be on all of the communications, so your stakeholders can reach out to me with anything that they might want to know further. Email me, call me, anytime. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we have Ashley. We don't have Rachel, but just as good. So thank you, Ashley, for
Staying really late.
Ashley's going to talk about our communication plan, our draft communication plan for the search, which has already gotten rave reviews from the experts. So fantastic.
Which is great. Thank you. Thank you, Chair Casey, school board members. I appreciate the opportunity to share our communications plan with you. I know this is a really exciting time for many of us because the person who is coming into this role is really going to be continuing to guide us in our strategic direction. So I know I'm really excited for that. And I hope that in your review of our communication plan, you'll see that those values are reflected in the key messages, strategies, tactics, and some of the other ideas that are going to come up as we go through. So please feel free to stop me and ask questions or provide suggestions along the way, because that's really going to help us to shape this to be what we want to reflect our community moving forward. So I know you have the copy of this in board book. If you haven't seen this already, the first thing that you're going to see is our communications goals. And one of the really important aspects of that goal is being culturally and linguistically relevant. And I think that really aligns with what we're trying to accomplish in our schools. So a lot of the tactics that you're going to see later on in the plan will be reflected in that. So we want this to be the way that we're informing our families about our search process, and we're really engaging with our community at all levels. So one of these really important aspects is incorporating student voice in this throughout our entire process. So I'll share a little bit more about some of the areas that we are hoping to engage students in different ways through different groups that they're involved in, and whether or not that's through focus groups. I know we had a little bit of dialogue around the focus groups already. So just to take a look at some of our key messaging, we're really trying to seek multiple racial perspectives throughout the engagement of that process, including meeting the candidates when we get to that point, and taking in that feedback so that when we're at the point of making that decision, you have the information that you need that's reflective of our community. So we're also going to be staying informed about the search for a new superintendent by reading district and school level communications, which we'll talk a little bit more about the specific channels of communication and who the audience is best served for. And we're especially, again, encouraging those students to participate in the engagement opportunities. So let me just make sure I'm hitting all these areas. So when we're considering our various audiences, of course we have our district website, which will be having a specific landing page for this process. And there might be some breakout pages for specific need-based topics that will come up throughout this. Of course, we'll be using lots of social media and our school newsletters, so both the SLP communicator and site-specific newsletters like the 6425, and then like La Prensa, which would be at PSI, Oriole Times of the middle school, and our other IB schools are branded as SLP or various communicators. So, and using these various channels specifically for those groups is going to be really important so that we're hitting all of our target audiences. As far as our internal audiences, one of those forms of communication that you're all very familiar with is our board briefs. So of course we'll be using that as an avenue where we're putting in short blurbs and updates around that. We also have two very staff newsletters, including the Flow, which is sent district-wide to all our staff, and then our weekly leadership communicator, which is used for our administration groups. And then when we're considering our specific groups for racial and multicultural groups, one of the key components that we're going to be talking about is engaging with them in a more one-to-one area. So again, we have about 5,000 students. I know the exact numbers are included in here. 5,000 students, 600, little under 620 employees. And so using the specific communication tools that will best meet their needs is going to be a really key aspect. So just coming through this. So of course we've got some of our communication action steps. So we included at the end of the communication plan, you'll see some of the examples of the branded communication examples. So Director Hicks has extensive experience in doing this type of work and has used some of those past examples to help guide some of the work that we're going to be using for our search process. So you'll see like one of the example websites is from 287, where she formerly was working at, and which really did take in a lot of consideration for the racial perspectives that we want to be considering here. And so that's something that we think is, when we think about what makes St. Louis Park unique, that is one of the areas that is really important about us, is partially our approach on racial equity. And that's something that we think will set us apart. I know that came up in our past conversation here about what's going to attract our talent. That's something that we're really going to want to highlight throughout our messaging. So I know we talked a little bit about the various web pages and different information that we'll be putting out there. One of our hopes is that we will be updating that website with new information weekly. And with that, that might be website pop-ups. So we have the ability to do different, you see it on our front page of our website where news posts get posted there. We can do that and update new ones so that they're different, different thumbnail images with a different story and short updates. The other thing that came up was if we wanted to do, like if we start getting many questions, and you guys will probably be most informed about those questions, if we need to do an FAQ spot to keep people informed about various needs there. The other aspect of this is our flyer distribution network, which is Peach Jar. So we do have the ability to send out flyers digitally, and that's mostly for middle school and elementary. Early learning also uses those flyer submissions as well. So as far as our tactics go, we know that this is still very early on in our planning process, and there's still lots to be determined. And so this plan is really kind of our initial thinking. We still have many and plenty of opportunity to adjust accordingly. And we know that when a search firm is determined that this could change. So as we move into the new year, we'll continue to work on updating information for the candidate page, and then implementing our plan to engage families so that we can better figure out what information is needed to share at a public area. Now, I think this next section is the part that's probably most interesting in the sense of like what I've been hearing through our conversation tonight is around the focus groups and whether or not focus groups is a way to go or not. I know we're planning still to do a survey, but what we've heard from our multicultural families is that focus groups are going to be better received because it's a one-to-one touch point, and translation services are already provided on site. So we worked with our multicultural liaisons, Carmen and Tarabi, to help provide a little bit of guidance. So if we were able to do some small, very intentional roundtables, and we've identified a couple of student groups even that we thought would be good touch points like SOAR, and there's a principals advisory group at the high school, that those might be really good touch points when we're considering also our student voice, to get that perspective that would be really helpful for us. Just want to touch on a couple more things. You'll see on here the superintendent example here. We're thinking that this could be either a postcard or a magnet, something that is sent home with all of our families. That QR code is directly then, families can scan it again on that weekly basis and be able to see those new updates. But overall, I think this is a pretty comprehensive use of all the tools that we have. Of course, there's a lot more that we could identify as when things are going out and what the messaging entails, but of course under further guidance as we get to those next steps. But my questions that I think would be really helpful for us in providing us with some more insight is if there's something that really resonates with you, please, I'd love to hear that. Or if there are things that you have as suggestions or ideas, I'm looking forward to hearing your advice.
I love the QR thing.
Yeah, you too.
That is great, and having it on a magnet on your fridge, and you can just like, boom, I want to know what's going on. So I might be the only person that does that, but I really appreciate that. Can I ask a question?
Please.
It's just two questions out of some curiosity. Is our communication, is it like, it goes out, you don't have to opt into it, it just goes out to all the families if you're enrolled in St. Louis Park?
Yeah, so this is actually a really great question. So as far as emails go, yes, everyone is opted in. And as far as text goes, starting this year, everyone from kindergarten that is new, yes, they will start getting text. But last year, if you remember this, we had the opt-in period. So there are still families who have yet to opt into our text messaging. So those families aren't receiving those. But yes, email and phone calls actually. And I didn't mention that, but we will be using both those strategies.
As a follow-up question, it's just an observation. When Matamidi went through both the superintendent search, our superintendent search, and then our strategic plan, we had a separate communication that was from our communication director, who just sort of summarized where we were in the process. That was sent out, and the reason why I found that helpful was because I paid a little bit more attention to it. The 6425 is already so full of all of the things, and I'm not entirely sure why anybody would say that they were uninformed because it's so long. But I think that if we reached a stage, it's always good. And Barb, I don't know if you can speak to if other districts did it, if it was just Matamidi that did it, but it was great just to have one singular email update that got sent out. And again, does everybody here get two messages when you get a text?
I used to.
I get the staff one and I get a parent one. So, but then in Matamidi, and is it the same with St. Louis Park? It just says you have a new communication, check your email? Is that what it is too? Okay. So that would be my only suggestions, is just, I liked having one singular thing about the superintendent, or last year was our strategic plan, just about that thing, because it just gets, some of the newsletters just get so long.
That's great advice. And I think actually when we think about our email, text, voice call, we will probably be doing some of those that are just that messaging around superintendent. For most of our site newsletters, we're usually doing short blurbs, 3 to 5 sentences, as far as like when we're providing district updates. So those are usually much, much shorter. So when we're trying to do more of like a feature, that's when we would do like a direct message. So this would be exactly one of those times that we would do that. I think in hearing what you're saying about text too, that it might be helpful to have a link in those text messages, right? A clickable link. So that's something that we'll take that into consideration. You can certainly update it with even the candidate page.
Just a thought.
Yes, great.
A couple things. First of all, thank you for starting with goals. As a communicator, it's so easy for people to jump over that, but you guys are professional communicators, so thank you. I want to recognize that. One of the, I think I have two main things here. One being, well, first of all, this is great. That one doesn't count, that's a freebie. The other comments are, one would be, can we put something in certain facilities too? Is there ability, and I'm thinking of the elementary schools, like a lot of times people are going in there for bingo or for PTO meetings or things like that. Parents are going in there, and if there's just reminders, you're going in there, hey, something like that. I'm thinking particularly of those, like the elementary schools as being key places to do that. And I'm also
You're thinking like, sorry, I apologize, but are you thinking like signage? Yeah.
Poster display,
Great.
something, whatever would be appropriate in sort of those key gathering spaces with a QR code on it. And I'm particularly thinking again for people who have a digital divide and wouldn't get something, or if you're sending something home with a kid, like we said, what gets stuck in a backpack and doesn't ever come out or whatever. The other thing is we do have SLP residents here, and I'm wondering, we're talking newsletters, and so we know that families get the newsletters, but they don't necessarily, not everybody in the community gets the newsletter, and we have different level of interest from the community. But obviously, there's certain people in the community who'd like to be involved with this too. So I don't know if there's a specific strategy that you're thinking there, if that's largely the sailor, if there's some other sort of things that we would do just for people's general awareness in the community as well to do that.
Yeah, I'll speak to that a little bit in here. One of our tactics is using press releases as needed, which would include the Sun Sailor. I'm also thinking our postcard potentially magnet idea is that it would potentially go district-wide if we were to do that. And that's also dependent on if we decide postcard or mailer, right? And how that goes.
Well, and we have things that I think go to the community, like our community mailers and stuff like that too, right? Or I forget how that breaks down, but that there could be an opportunity in there too or something like that.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Oh, especially like the community ed and Linux.
That's
and having particularly.
Senior.
No, I'm just wondering about the QR code. I'm thinking about my mother right now. But like really leaning into our community education and Linux centers as ways of getting that information. My mom does not like QR codes.
But printouts, or having a handful of printouts
Correct.
that are
especially right there at the door
Linux, or
as they're walking
at
in.
another city gathering site, city hall or something like that, if they would be so kind or something like that.
There are lots of ways to make those flyers, both for digital people and for people who don't want to do QR codes. So, yeah.
But thank you, Director Cox, for that. I had it written down and I just didn't get to it.
I just wanted to add, thank you for reminding me about Rachel's experience in 287 and the thing there, because it connects to Abby Hakim's question of Barb, which is that the board did, in that case, receive all the survey feedback disaggregated by race. And also, community member, staff, whatever. So that did happen. Rachel has done this before, and it was successful. And I think we actually had quite a, I think we were pleased with the representation that we had. It felt like representative of our district. So that's great.
But thank you for that. And thank you for your additional feedback. If you have extra questions, please feel free to connect with us.
I think you're going to be spending a lot of time with us. So hopefully everything is okay with that.
Please do.
Yes. And so I just asked if I could express gratitude to Ashley, because Ashley, you may have noticed, was serving a dual role tonight, neither of which are part of her job in any way, shape, or form. So we're down a couple of staff members today who are really ill. So not only is Ashley here presenting on Rachel's behalf, and they co-developed this plan, which is wonderful, but she's presenting for Rachel, but she's also doing the live stream because another team member is down. So I just want to express my gratitude.
Thank you.
Early in the day when we knew this was all coming down, I said, Ashley, this is a great professional growth opportunity. Inspiring leadership.
And she's tell you I was going to go till 9 p.m.
I assumed.
Pretty soon you're going to be working on your superintendent's license.
Because there's a need.
Thank you.
I wholeheartedly second that. Thank you, Dr. McGuire.
Thank you.
Okay, we are at our consent agenda, I believe. I don't think I missed anything. No. Okay, so is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented? Moved by Abby Hakim. Second by Heather. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Now we have on our action agenda, the superintendent search MSBA executive search services proposal. It is recommended that the board approve the MSBA executive services proposal. So what I'll do is I'll take a motion in a second and then we can discuss. So is there a motion to approve the MSBA executive search services proposal?
I'll move.
Moved by Colin,
A second.
second by Ken. All right, any further discussion?
Thank you for the thorough information packet.
I want to throw out that I didn't get to add my hopes and dreams last time, but if I had, what I would have said is for the process. I mean, I have big hopes and dreams for who our next superintendent is going to be. But for the process, I would have said I want this process to be our process, our decision, our community's process, and I want it to be super well supported. Right? Like that we feel like we have all the information that we need and all the guidance that we need in order to have the decision be ours. And so the reason that I wanted to go to MSBA and have you all see their proposal is that I really felt that they were going to meet both of those things. The support I knew was going to be there because we saw it this fall. I mean, I don't know if you all know this, but like, I called MSBA in a panic and said, our superintendent just resigned. So, and I got a call back from Barb within, I think, 10 minutes. And every time I called her, she answered the phone. And I know that was the case for several other folks, right? Like when someone had a question, call Barb and she answered. So that support piece, that feels really, really good. And then in terms of being our process, I did not even know this when we first asked Barb to present, but being able to have the board see all of the applications is not the case with other search firms. It was not my experience in the previous search I did, and I don't think it was the case here in the last search that they did here.
I just want to add.
Yeah.
For the record, I mentioned that your voice was missing.
Last time.
Answer the question.
He did.
Thank you. So anyway, I think that really felt like this is the place where it feels like it's our search. We're the ones making the decisions. The search firm isn't making all the decisions. We see all the information. We don't have anything gatekept from us. So it felt like this. I feel very strongly that that this firm, that MSBA and Barb and her team are going to be able to sort of really walk us through this process and have it be our process.
And I just want to say then, now that you have shared that, I thank you, because my understanding was that they were gate and we would not see all of the applications. And that was a concern of mine. So thank you for sharing that. And I saw it in the proposal, but that you knew it going in would have been helpful.
I didn't know until I saw the proposal, or until we talked last week. So no, I didn't know. Okay. So with that, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. We're going to be seeing a lot of you.
Thank you very much. We're honored to help. Look forward to it.
We are too. Get your phone ready because I know there's going to be a lot of calls.
Sounds good.
Okay, we have our SEIU Local 284 School Nutrition Labor Agreement. Director Cryer, you're still here? Okay. You want to just tee this up for us? It's our first one.
It's our first one.
All right.
Yeah, so as we talked about in the spring, we had, I think it's 8 contracts open this year. We started bargaining with teachers, custodians, and school nutrition over the summer. And then they just kind of go bing, bing, bing eventually as you get going. All good negotiations, very collaborative, very clear, very good problem solving. We're just bringing the nutrition one first. We'll bring the custodian contract, I believe, on December 12th. And hopefully there'll be news soon about teachers when we get the final polish on that one too. This contract, we did a lot of work this year on district-wide initiatives to clean up language, make things more consistent, more clear. One example that I'd tell you about is our contracts would say things like and your sick leave shall be prorated, or, deferred compensation, employees will receive up to $1,000 of deferred compensation match prorated. HR knew what that was, payroll knew what it was, but it always wasn't clear to employees what that was. And so we took the time to spell that language out better so that when a person leaves, or the person only is 0.5 and they get $500 of match, why didn't I get the $1,000 that the contract says? And so that language is much clearer, and we're working through all the contracts that we have open this time. So clear language on setting steps and years of service. It's and you get a step increase for a year of service. Well, how long do you have to be in the district if you're a new hire before that's a year? And we had about 6 different definitions across the district for what constituted a year. And so we've, again, met with all of our groups and are starting to get that consistency so that a year is a year is a year as you go through all the contracts. Little cleanup things about debts. If you have $30 on your school lunch program when you quit, we can collect that on the final check. If you've overused your sick leave or vacation and then you quit, we can collect that on the last check. And when we've always been able to do that, but we've had to do individual agreements to repay. And if we have it in the collective bargaining unit, that's a term and condition of employment, and we can do it when they have. Obviously, we have to be right. They could grieve if we did it wrong. But we can let them know that there's going to be a payroll deduction because you used 12 days of sick leave and you only worked a month, and then you quit. Got paid for days you didn't actually earn. We coordinated the new earn, safe, and sick leave language that's effective January 1st into our contract so that if you get 10 days of sick leave in our contract, you don't get another 6 days when the earn, sick, and safe. We coordinated those. So since our plan is more generous than the state's plan, we can fold theirs inside ours and make it. The only thing we had to do is broaden some of the definitions because the definitions in the state laws are broader than some of our definitions, but we didn't have to go to additional days. We could keep it within the leave plans that we had. Coordinated, in this contract, we work through layoff language. We don't have a lot of layoffs. We'd actually like to hire more cooks, but the best time to deal with seniority language is when you don't have any layoffs in front of you. So we took the opportunity to change language that says, and may bump a less senior employee to shall bump the least senior employee. One definition of that would be, I want that job over there, so I'm going to bump that person because they're less senior, and then that person would bump that person, and then that person could finally bump that person. And this makes it clearer that if there's a vacancy, you go to the vacant position. If there's somebody that you're going to bump, you bump the least senior, and then it's one bump and done. So we worked through that language. This contract still has a couple, I think 3 people that are severance eligible. We now have some Roth IRA options. Our severance plans get put into our 403B plans. We wanted to ensure that we didn't, if you were going to get paid severance and it was intended to go to a non-taxable 403B, that you couldn't then divert it to a taxable Roth IRA and create a tax implication for the district. So we put that language in. And believe it or not, we increased the summer differential for the school nutrition people to $2 per hour over their regular rate because they can stay home now and collect unemployment. And so we actually created an incentive for people who would come in and work nutrition services over the summer instead of collecting unemployment. And we increased the clothing differential equal to the male custodial group. For years, they always had a lesser amount of clothing allowance. And I believe, it was perfectly prorated to the custodians work 12 months and this many hours, and this group works 9 months and this many hours. but really you wear your uniforms all year. And so there, you know, if you thought about it with a different light, it made sense to bring the two uniform groups consistent. So we did that as well. Any other questions?
And they voted on this. I mean, I
No, I'm sorry, I didn't tee that up. I'm sorry.
It is written here.
Yes, it's, but typically, almost universally, we have the union vote on the contract first, and then we bring it to the board after it's been ratified. Due to the timing and how things are stacking up and trying to get this contract done, work on the back pay so that we can get it on the December 15 check, we're asking the board to approve this contract tonight, and the nutrition will vote on it on Thursday, the 30th. We should know by the end of the day on that, and it takes two parties to agree, so if you agree and they don't, we're still back to the table. If they agree and you don't, we're back to the table, and so either way, we're just asking the board, for convenience sake, to approve this, and then we'll wait for the SEIU vote on Thursday.
Okay. Okay, I would entertain a motion to approve the labor agreement for school nutrition employees for 2023 through 25 as presented. Moved by Sarah, second by Abby Akeem. Any further discussion? Thank you, and thanks to the hardworking folks in the bargaining unit. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That carries. All right. Communications and transmittals. Anybody have anything quick?
One quick thing I'll say, I did go to Family Connect Day at the high school, and just want to say an appreciation for the teachers that were there and participated. I had some really good conversations, and there were a few other parents at Plus Parts they attended in the afternoon, but I really appreciated the effort that the teachers put into it. And for English, when the teachers put together a PowerPoint presentation that explained what's going on. For math, they were going to test us. They wanted to quiz us on some things and see if we knew stuff, and then they decided, since there was a small group, not to do that. But I appreciate the opportunity and looking forward to what it could look like come springtime.
Oh, it's gonna be so cool.
Anybody else? I said before, I'll say it again, December 12th, our truth and taxation hearing is at 6 p.m. and then our board meeting will be at 6:30. Before that, at what time?
5 o'clock.
5 o'clock, our reception for our outgoing board members, Ken and Heather, who we're gonna miss.
Yay!
We're just gonna miss that. So come and celebrate them at 5 o'clock.
And I forgot, there is coffee with the principal next Tuesday at the high school from 3 to 3:30.
It's always difficult to say goodbye, old colleagues, but excited for the new ones too.
I think Sarah's bringing donuts for everybody.
I went, and there were free donuts. There were free donuts.
You had a very cute picture. I don't know if you saw it.
I didn't see it.
Yeah, it was a cute picture. I forget which.
All right, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Virginia, second by Sarah, Virginia and Sarah. And all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we are adjourned at 9:14. Yes, that's good. They had